When you live and die by the transfer portal, your team experiences life and death because of the transfer portal. Mel Tucker has used the portal since he arrived at Michigan State, and it was a big reason for his success in 2021 and his failure in 2022. While the verdict is still out on whether the transfer portal will hurt or benefit Michigan State in 2023, with Payton Thorne and especially with Keon Coleman departing the program, and when you depart via the portal, it's very unlikely you will return, I would say that the portal for Michigan State this season is leaning more toward being a negative effect on the program rather than a positive one. Nonetheless, Charles Brantley entered the portal on April 30th, which was the last day that you could enter the portal with, I think, guaranteed eligibility for the 2023 season. And Brantley has returned to the program and withdrawn his name from the portal. And Keon Coleman is currently still meeting with Mel Tucker and the staff, according to an article that was released this Tuesday, May 2nd. Michigan State football and the staff are still talking with Coleman. Coleman met with Mel Tucker in his office as recently as Monday. He is in communication with the staff and weighing his options before making any decisions, which is a good sign if the Spartans are, as they should be, trying to keep Coleman in East Lansing. And what a win, especially symbolically, would that be for Michigan State football from a culture and recruiting standpoint if Keon Coleman returns. However, in talking and making this video, I'm not going to be making the assumption that Keon Coleman is returning. Especially, I'm not making the assumption Payton Thorne is returning. So we're going to be talking about these two and what their departure would mean for Michigan State football, and tying that in with the current state of the roster and what the expectations for 2023 should be. Because if you're a program like Ohio State or Alabama or Georgia, like the top three in total talent who are on, I mean, their level of talent is like no other. Texas might be joining them soon enough with how Texas has been recruiting under Sarkisian, but need a little bit more consistency before I make it the big four instead of the big three when it comes to recruiting blue chip prospects. Maybe USC with Lincoln Riley, though. I'd like to see them sign several top 5 classes. Anyway, those three programs, Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama, they lose a key player, and it hurts, but they can reload. And in the case of Ohio State with Jackson Smith-Njigba, if they had Smith-Njigba, their passing game is definitely better. They still had one of the best passing games in the nation, with Smith-Njigba basically inactive for the entire season. I mean, that's how deep their wide receiver room is. That's how good their offense is. I mean, they have resources from a talent, developmental, and schematic standpoint. They are Ohio State. They are a top 3 program when it comes to recruiting and when it comes to depth. And I'm not talking about for 2023 specifically. I'm talking about in general. Like, if you were to list 3 programs that are at the top in recruiting, the top in development, and if you were to pick, if you had to make a bet or take a chance, you'd pick one of those 3 programs because they're the most consistent when it comes to talent, when it comes to on-field results, and when it comes to producing NFL prospects and recruiting, all those things factored in over the past few seasons. What I'm going into, and maybe I expanded on that a little too much, is they lose a key player and it hurts. Michigan State is nowhere close to those 3 programs, let alone they're not even close to the Michigans, Penn States of this world, or the Floridas, the programs that still recruit and develop extremely well, but they're not at that top 3 level. Michigan State's not close to the top 3, let alone the top 15. And Keon Coleman was arguably, in my opinion, their best player on offense. And once you go into the portal, the likelihood that you come back is extremely slim. When you're a player like Keon Coleman, let me tell you what this is more similar to than not. This is more similar to Jordan Addison leaving Pittsburgh. Now I know Michigan State has a much higher donor base. They have billionaires that have been proven to be more than happy to invest in football and invest in Michigan State athletics, as shown by Mel Tucker's contract, the building of new facilities, NIL deals, etc. You're still not USC. You are not Alabama. You are not Georgia. You are not Ohio State, though Ohio State has no need for Keon Coleman in their deep wide receiver room. But all those other schools, actually I wouldn't quite say Georgia, but Alabama, they have no wide receivers. In fact, there might be an argument that Michigan has a better wide receiver room than Alabama, that several Big Ten teams have better wide receiver rooms than Alabama does right now. They are barren currently in that wide receiver room. They could use Keon Coleman. There are big-time programs with more money, with deeper pockets, with better reputations that would take Keon Coleman in a heartbeat. And he would start there. Great, elite possession wide receiver. He's tall, 6'4", 210 pounds. He led the team in receiving yards and receptions and average yards per reception if you had more than 10 receptions, and receiving touchdowns for all Michigan State receivers. He's out of Louisiana, 6'4", 210 pounds, was a sophomore this past season. Really phenomenal player. And he had games of 90 yards or more against Washington, Michigan, Indiana, and Penn State. And he performed well against Michigan and Penn State, who had some of the best secondaries in the country this past season. He averaged 31 average yards per catch against Michigan. So Keon Coleman, big-time wide receiver, big-time transfer portal prospect. I mean, really, you lose a lot from that standpoint if you're Michigan State. You lose a whole lot. I would say Keon Coleman on this roster, because of how talent barren it is, compared to teams like Ohio State, Michigan, Georgia, Alabama, Texas, USC, Keon Coleman is worth a game. Jackson Smith and Jigba might be worth, or might have been worth, a specific game for Ohio State. Maybe that he would have been worth the Georgia game, since that was a 1-point, very close Georgia win. Wouldn't have made as much of a difference in the Michigan game, or let's say hypothetically Ohio State loses to Georgia by double digits. Then that's maybe not as much of a factor. Keon Coleman is worth collectively one whole swing in a game, or he's worth several points in several games. He just is. Leading the team in receiving touchdowns. Jayden Reed's already left. Jeremy Bernard transferred to Washington. Jayden Reed got drafted by the Packers in the second round. You could have argued that 3 of Michigan State's most talented wide receivers from 2022 are gone. They're gone. The only proven wide receiver left is Trey Mosley, who's very good and very underrated, but he can't carry the whole room. So if I were Mel Tucker, while Keon Coleman's still out in the portal, I mean, I know that you want to get him back, but you got to get someone to fill that spot. Check out the Colorado guys. I mean, and check out anyone who's available. Guys who can contribute. Mel Tucker has not been afraid to take chances on guys who everyone else thought were dead weight. Think of Kenneth Walker and what he turned into. So, Keon Coleman is a big-time loss. That is something that I saw as a Michigan fan, and I'm like, whoa. And then in the back of my head, I'm also thinking as a Michigan fan, can't we pony up some money for this kid? Because I guarantee you he might be the best wide receiver on our team. He's a phenomenal wide receiver. In fact, him leaving Michigan State makes me view Michigan State's wide receiver core as now being an above-average Power 5 wide receiver core as compared to one of the best in the Big Ten and a top 20, potentially top 10 wide receiver core nationally. Because of, again, that's how good Keon Coleman is. Now, Payton Thorne, story's very different. Payton Thorne, I'm going to keep it short, sweet. I've already talked about Keon Coleman for 5 minutes. Payton Thorne is not worth 5 minutes. Him leaving means that competition between him and Noah Kim was getting too close for comfort. Noah Kim's going to be the starter. Redshirt junior, he showed, whether it's against backups in the Minnesota and Ohio State games last year, where he had a perfect QBR and a near-perfect passer rating, or whether it was in the open spring practice, he has shown in small, consistent moments that he has a higher ceiling than Payton Thorne. And Payton Thorne, I know, played with injuries this past season. I know that he had a phenomenal 2021 season, but 2022 was a disaster. And even when you play with injuries, sometimes a change is needed. And I think Mel Tucker senses that. And I don't know if Payton Thorne would have even lost the job if he stayed, but I think he wants a guaranteed starting role. And if you have Noah Kim and Katon Hauser and even Sam Leavitt, that's a talented enough quarterback room with a program that is desperate enough to win under Michigan State, where they're not going to give you guarantees. Nor should they, after the disaster of a season that Payton Thorne had in 2022. So Noah Kim is your starting quarterback there. Now, does Noah Kim being the starting quarterback and Keon Coleman leaving the program, does that mean that Michigan State's hopes of doing anything spectacular are just thrown out? I made a video a few weeks ago saying that Michigan State is, in my opinion, a sleeper team in the Big Ten. Sleeper team doesn't mean contender. In fact, I'd actually put it a level below dark horse. But what it means is that if a team were to shock everyone, and if Michigan State was that team to shock everyone, I could make sense of it from a pre-season angle. I could see how this team could come together and be a top 20, top 15, top 10 team from a preseason angle. I could see scenarios in which that happens, even though it's very unlikely. That's what a sleeper means. A team that I don't expect to play at the highest level, that I don't think has a lot of pieces to play at that highest level, but they do have enough things going for them, or enough things in place to where if the schedule aligns, if player development and schematics align, and enough things align and go Michigan State's way, they could be conference contenders, even though it's very unlikely. But with Keon Coleman gone, as I've said, I think he's worth a whole game. That's how big of an impact he is. You only play 12 regular season games. One player being worth one game means he's an impact player. He might be worth more than one game because he was by far the team's best wide receiver. Now, Michigan State luckily has a very deep tight end room. I actually think that's the deepest room on their entire offense. They have an offensive line with more experience that'll be better than last year's unit. Their defense, I think, will improve. It might be Scotty Hazelton's best defense of the Mel Tucker era, which isn't saying much. But hey, improvement's improvement. I'm very confident this will be the best secondary of the Scotty Hazelton era. When Charles Brantley left, I didn't think much of it outside of just more addition by subtraction, even though Charles Brantley was one of the better cornerbacks for Michigan State secondary, because the secondary has just been so bad. And I think that Dylan Tatum, Jaden Mangum, Malik Spencer, Marquis Lowry Jr., that these younger guys, I mean, Dylan Tatum was a 4-star athlete recruited by Mel Tucker, that some of these younger guys will be better than what Mel Tucker inherited or what he bandaged together via the portal. I think the secondary will be good. I think the linebacker core, returning both Jacoby Windman and Cal Halliday, will potentially see some improvement as well. The defense will be solid. The question, of course, for Michigan State is now the wide receiver core that immediately went from being one of the strengths of the team to being potentially one of their biggest weaknesses, all because one player decided that he wanted to depart, whether it was for more money, whether it's because of uncertainty at quarterback. And we all know that, teams like to look at statistics, and with a new quarterback and with the offense that Michigan State runs, Keon Coleman has a better chance to be a 1,000-yard receiver at many different places. Michigan State at wide receiver, I think, is in a peculiar position because you got Trey Mosley, you got Monterey Foster Jr. I mean, those are two talented wide receivers. You have Cade McDonald, who was backup last year, I think third stringer. I don't know if he's a walk-on or not, but I've heard of him before. I don't know much about him at all, though. I know of Monterey Foster, and I know of Trey Mosley, who had a fantastic 2021 season, and people sadly forgot about him in 2022. You shouldn't. As far as we're concerned, unless Keon Coleman returns, or unless Mel Tucker lands a big-time wide receiver via the portal, Trey Mosley is now your wide receiver 1. Keon Coleman also leaving Michigan State further mocks my video where I suggest they run an air raid, because now you look at Michigan State and their running back room is deep. I think that Nathan Carter is a stud. Their quarterback room is deep, but their running back and tight end room and offensive line are all good. So what does that scream if those three positions are good, but your wide receiver room has questions? Will you pound the football and play pro style? You don't do an air raid if you have questions at wide receiver, have great tight ends, have good running backs, and your offensive line has experience. Not saying that Michigan State's going to be fantastic at running the football, but these further developments at Michigan State make my air raid MSU video, while I think a good idea in the past, in the present, don't think that's very much of a good idea right now. You have a good QB. You have an offensive line with experience. I think you have a great running back in Nathan Carter, who, if Kenneth Walker can be replicated, and it can be replicated at Michigan State, it will be Nathan Carter who does it. It will not be Jalen Berger. It will not be Jaron Mangum. It will be Nathan Carter. Just look at his statistics at UConn in 4 games and watch him, both in the open practice at MSU and at UConn, and you will see. The quarterback room is solid. With Noah Kim and with Katon Hauser, I guarantee you Noah Kim's going to start. We won't know exactly how good he is until actual games are played. So that's just going to be something where the games decide who he is on the football field, so on and so forth. And the main thing for the 2023 outlook is just survive. If you're Mel Tucker, just survive. I mean, if you're a Michigan State football fan and you have season tickets, if you're a college football fan and you're paying attention to Michigan State, just survive. Just improve. Avoid the disaster that was last year and just go on. Like, if you're Mario Cristobal, as much of an overrated head coach I think he is, just survive. I mean, don't try and win the ACC after going 5-7. You fire your coordinators or they leave you in protest, aka Charlie Strong, when you maybe should have promoted them. Just improve. Just go bowling and continue to improve. Like, because Mel Tucker's continuing to improve on the recruiting trail. Every one of his recruiting classes has gotten better. Now, I don't know how 2024 will be, but just improve. Don't shoot for Pluto. You're never going to reach there. Michigan State isn't going to reach Indy. I don't think so in 2023 because, newsflash, Ohio State exists. And schematically, until you recruit better or make your defense top 25, they will beat you by 40 every year. Michigan exists, and they haven't forgotten 2020 or 2021. And they're much better than you. And they're deeper than you. Penn State exists, and despite James Franklin's game day incompetence, they are much more talented than you are. All these things stand in Michigan State's way. And with what they've lost through either remaining eligibility expired, players declared for the NFL draft, or the portal, Michigan State in 2023, especially with a tough schedule, which features Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, Washington, all of whom, at the end of 2023, there is a realistic scenario in which those four teams are the top four teams in the nation. There's a scenario where that happens. And part of the reason that's true is because Alabama and Georgia have ridiculously low returning production numbers, but that scenario is possible. For Michigan State to go 7-5, and in 5 of those losses they only lose by 2 touchdowns or less, I think would be it'd be a phenomenal improvement over 2022. For Michigan State to go 8-4, only losing to those 4 teams, or beating one of them but losing to Iowa on the road, or losing to Minnesota on the road, that would be 8-4 with this schedule would be phenomenal. Michigan State would be a top 25 team at the end of the regular season at 8-4. 6-6, while not phenomenal, it's a 1-game improvement, and I guarantee you with their schedule, Michigan State would be a strong 6-6 team, probably go out, win their bowl game, finish 7-6. Just win, just improve. The team has so many questions already, and what Keon Coleman and Payton Thorne departing the program do, all that does is add more questions. And when more questions come up, when the depth of the team and the talent of the team decreases, you want to taper some expectations. I saw an article and some opinions that said Mel Tucker should be on the hot seat because of this. It's ridiculous. If Keon Coleman was constantly chasing money and Michigan State had to pay him every year, for example, and Mike Valenti said this on his show, then that's not Mel Tucker's fault. Name, image, and likeness era gives players the opportunity to walk away regardless of what the program or coach does. It gives phenomenal independence, NIL plus the portal does. Isn't Mel Tucker's fault. It isn't. And even if part of it is, he's bringing in recruiting classes, transfer portal, and high school that have higher quality players than what Mark D'Antonio was bringing in. And it is year 4. Year 3 if you don't count the COVID year. And I think that Mel Tucker, if he improves, should be given 2023, and 2024 should be the red line. If he doesn't improve in 2023, you go 5-7 again, or you regress, go 3-9, 4-8, maybe, and probably there should be something to talk about. But to me, that's ridiculous. It's lunacy. 11-2 in 2021, 5-7 in 2022. I thought 2022 would be a regression, but I didn't even think anything close to that. Most people, myself included, thought 8-4, maybe 9-3. Some thought 10-2. Some biased lunatics said MSU would go 11-1 and win the East, which was never happening. But 5-7 was outer worldly. And it happened. And it was disappointing. But I don't think losing Keon Coleman should turn the temperature meter on Mel Tucker's seat up 100 degrees. Or Payton Thorne. You think losing Payton Thorne's a big deal? Just look at how he performed against Ohio State in 2021 or 2022. Non-factor. Horrid in both of those games. Look how he performed against Michigan. I mean, you look at how Payton Thorne performs in the biggest of games, and even though he had a record-breaking 2021 season, you look at the biggest of games. The biggest of games that Michigan State has won under Mel Tucker were because of Kenneth Walker, or to talk about the other outgoing transfer who withdrew his name, Charles Brantley, who he stopped Cade McNamara from likely driving down the field against the worst secondary in the nation and redeeming the choke job that Michigan did in 2021. Payton Thorne was not a huge contributing factor to any of Michigan State's big wins or any of their big games. Noah Kim might actually have that upside. Losing Keon Coleman's a big deal. Bringing back Charles Brantley, I think, helps with the team culture and team morale. It would be good if Payton Thorne could come back. I'm not saying he's a terrible player. What I'm saying is he's not the biggest loss. If Keon Coleman returns and Payton Thorne doesn't, well, as far as I'm concerned, that would change literally not much, if anything, involving the program outside of maybe power rankings, which power rankings themselves are just power rankings. They don't determine actual records. They're just projections. Thank you all for watching my video. I'm going to be, now that the spring games are over, I'm going to be making a post-spring Big Ten record predictions video and also a post-spring top 25. The Big Ten video I'm going to be working on first. I hope to release it within a week or two, hopefully the former. The top 25 video will come after that. So please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can get notified when those things release. Comment your thoughts down below and like the video. Do you think that the sky is falling in East Lansing, Michigan? Or do you think that this isn't much of a big deal and that Mel Tucker knows what he's doing? Or are you somewhere in the middle? Let me know down in the comments below, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.